welcome back. We missed you.
It's been too long.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for a great session previously where we did a little show and tell of some of the work happening around domains. And as Lauren already mentioned in that session, it was kind of a beautiful segue into what we'll be talking about for the next roughly 40 minutes is what does it look like to build out your domains community? We spent a lot of times yesterday talking about the nuts and bolts of understanding the various systems that run domain of one's own and getting familiar with some of the kind of troubleshooting tips, et cetera, administration tools. Now let's take a look at what people do as they're in the kind of rhythm of domains, building out various elements of it. And that comes in many different strains. And we have a bunch of examples across various schools to show you. But one of the ones we want to start with today is Coventry domains. I'm not sure if Noah is in the audience, but Noah, if you are and you want to jump in, we can share a link in Discord where you could actually jump into this session. So I don't know, Taylor or Pilot, if you want to put a link in just in case someone wants to come in and talk about any of their building out, because I know we'll talk about University of Oklahoma as well. Feel free to do that. So Coventry domains. One of the things that's super interesting about this instance is Coventry domains started with folks like Lauren Haywood and Danielle Villar on Rubio, and more recently, Noah Mitchell, with the idea of providing faculty and students their own cPanel instance, their domain of one's own. No surprise for many of you here today. But one of the things they realized as time went on, and one of the ways they built out their instances, they realized that a lot of folks who are using domain of one's own predominantly were using it for WordPress. And so they wanted to say, hey, let's direct a good amount of our users directly to a WordPress multi-site instance, right? And so kind of balance, like, when is it that you need WordPress multi-site? A one site up, go, share, build what you need to, and then get out, or take it with you, but only WordPress, versus a cPanel instance where you're really building in a whole bunch of different options. You're working with HTML, you're working with various applications like we talked about previously, Omeka S, etc. You know, it's a different environment. And as Lauren already said today, the two don't have to be understood as mutually exclusive. And one of the things that's so great about Coventry domains is that they made that shift probably the second or 2.5 years into their domain of one's own exploration, we'll call it. They said, look, we want to integrate WordPress multi-site as a point where when people come to Coventry domains, they have a choice. And you can see it here pretty nicely. They say, for students, you know, by and large, you're going to get a WordPress. Here it is. This will take us to our WordPress multi-site. And this will get you up and running very quickly. And again, kind of simplify the experience for folks not having the cPanel, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say, I also really appreciate, just from a design perspective, the decision that they have, you know, so they are framing it up front for students versus for educators, as you mentioned, Jim, but I think it's really cool. Their login, that's going directly to WordPress multi-site. So they are kind of setting that as the default or first step,
Yes.
which I think is really cool as just that first entry point. And we talked about that yesterday is, you know, WordPress multi-site is kind of your foot in the door, right? And then domain of one's own for the more exploratory stuff. And then the cloud even after that. So I like, even just from a design decision, that login goes straight to WordPress multi-site, but then they're also still highlighting domain of one's own here as well. So anyway, just interjecting there.
I mean, I do think that the way in which they integrated this is really seamless. And it makes a point that I think, you know, is subtle but really powerful. While you're defaulting to WordPress to get up and running, or WordPress multi-site, domain of one's own is an extension of that toolkit, right? It is, once that is no longer the limits of WordPress multi-site, you're running up against them, then domain of one's own and cPanel becomes a real option.
That's kind of one thing I wanted to ask or pose, because I think there's possibly some people in the workshop who aren't actually familiar with the limitations of WordPress multi-site and what, you know, because it obviously it gets folks WordPress, and that can be configured where they can have either a directory based URL or a subdomain. Like, you can still do that, but some of the things that are limitations are both good and bad, right? Like, so with the WordPress multi-site, the administrator of it curates themes that people can pick from and plugins, which on the one hand, coming from Domain of One's Own, you might go, well, that means that people can install their own themes and plugins. And that's true. But on the other hand, as you've probably helped people get started with WordPress, it's really overwhelming digging through themes and plugins. So
Part
it's
of
kind
what
of
we talked about with templates even.
totally. Yes.
Yeah.
So but the nice thing of having both, right? Like if you need that scale of WordPress and of a WordPress multi-site, is that the minute you have a user who's like, well, I need these 8 plugins, and you're like, we're not going to put all those on our multi-site. We don't have anyone else who needs them. That's where you've got that release valve to domains. And that's really powerful, I think.
That's what they're even calling out right here on the site. So right now I'm on actually where they are featuring Domain of One's Own on that second tab there, and what you can do with domains. And they're talking about FTP access or alternative CMS options or new themes and plugins. So they're already kind of separating the fact that WordPress multi-site is cool. Anybody can go on there and sign up for an account, or you can come here and request an account. And then that's just from an admin perspective too, you're kind of managing that growth in a way that I think folks appreciate with the request form, because you're able to just see that over time in a way that's, you can't really do with self-service.
And there is an economics to it. There's no two ways about it. With cPanel, schools pay by cPanel account. And so if you have a bunch of folks who are just needing WordPress and a very stripped down WordPress, it makes sense to marry those two tools and kind of think about it as an evolution. And I know that Coventry is a perfect example. We'll talk to another one here shortly, but like, this is a really thoughtful, constructive, and often kind of efficient way to think about offering various tools to your community without maybe throwing out the baby with the bathwater, to use a kind of tried metaphor or cliche or whatever. The other thing I want to talk about with Coventry Domains, because I love it, is coventry.domain/learn. That's the URL, coventry.domain/learn. And I highlight, bookmark it, take a look here. This was developed by Lauren Haywood and Daniel and Noah, again, a great team at Coventry. And this, what I love is it's basically like a meta reflection on, okay, you got this tool, Domain of One's Own. What is it?
Yeah.
Why?
I love this design visually, because I've always said it's like stepping stones to getting a really robust digital space online. Not only we're not jumping into installing WordPress, we're starting back further than that. Why are we here? What is the web? How to plan a design or a site that works for everyone, so you're already thinking of, accessibility before you even start, right? And then you have that introduction into cPanel and into the tech.
And yesterday we were talking a little bit about, we didn't really manage to go super in depth, but I know that some people in the chat were talking about how to emphasize digital literacy and considerate design, how to be able to build that in a manageable way when you're onboarding people to Domain of One's Own. And this is a great resource for getting people who have no experience, no practice thinking about these things, familiar with
the beginners.
The true beginners who aren't familiar with this. Here's something to look at to get a little bit of inspiration, maybe.
Yeah, and I will say, thinking about that is one of the things that we'll be talking about later on today. Is what does it mean to build a curriculum around Domain of One's Own, and what does it mean to kind of prepare faculty, staff, and students alike for the journey? And I do think Learn is a really good template for thinking about, like, what are some of the curricular kind of bigger ideas that a Domain of One's Own or WordPress multi-site or what have you help folks focus on. What do they kind of afford them to think through, and what tools do they have to extend some of their capabilities to learn how the web works? And I think the Learn site does this really well. And I'm also biased because they use the house metaphor to describe the domain.
They do.
You know how I feel about the house metaphor.
And and coming back to this landing page support, so there is a /learn, which I jumped to, because they do have a separate space for domain of one's own support versus Coventry Domains WordPress support. So I thought that was great too. And the stepping stones /learn design is fantastic, but this is also, just for WordPress, getting started with the WordPress multi-site is just as cool too. So,
and I think Noah, when he did a community chat with us, showed us there's another support site that they have that's just for like faculty, that says, okay, if you're a faculty member going through this, it's really kind of like beautifully nuanced and contextualized support for every element of their community. So again, if you're looking for inspiration of maybe how to kind of build out your domain of one's own site, because what you have now, if you're a fairly new school or if you've just been trying to get the ropes of it, is you have our Enfold theme with a nice, and it is a very nice header, and the 3 highlights of, what does it mean to be digitally literate. You'll see in our examples here that schools have now started to build on that to make it their own.
Almost to the point, well, not almost, we need to update our homepage at that point. Like, I want ours to look like these.
Let's not go there now.
I know.
Have some updates. What would be nice is to create for people to customize in terms of like, maybe we have we not everyone is in agreement on page builders, but I think having building our thing, because that's a pretty big goal.
I definitely Elementor for a lot of but it also gave me and provides code for domain own. And again, if you're looking for for your community, like that for me,
pretty chill for the block editor.
So I did want to jump to another example while we're ready.
Sure.
Nothing else about Coventry.
Lauren, we're ready. I just want to say special thank you to John Stewart for including another, and we'll be using this for our afternoon session, John, the WebFest, him and Keegan, or I think they did it together. I think it was at ET4 Online, where they actually built a curriculum for folks to work through. So that's another one we could add to our list of great curriculum. So thank you for that, John.
There's audio problems in the chat. Being reported.
Pilot, are you hearing us okay?
You're coming through fine for me, which means it's something going
between
to the
StreamYard and
stream.
YouTube.
Okay, so
It is
while we're
for me.
troubleshooting, I'm just going to keep running into the next example
Sure.
because regardless, I think we're still streaming and recording. So I just want to keep
Yes,
going.
I agree.
Hopefully we can work through that on the back end.
Soldier on.
Exactly. In the meantime, I am going to jump to University of Oklahoma's create.ou.edu. And John Stewart, if you are out there listening, maybe we can have a StreamYard link for him and he can come in and talk
I am going to put
more
one in
eloquently
there
about
right
this than I can, but I have to feature this because it is pretty great.
Reports are that audio has been fixed. Reloading the page has helped.
Great.
Very good.
Yes.
So I think this is another great example of how a domain of one's own and WordPress multi-site school are talking about these services in a single space about how they can be used together. And I love how how folks are delivering these tools. And so starting first with showing your work, your skills, your online presence, and logging in. And I think Oklahoma has a similar strategy here where, they had domains for quite a few years. And if that's the only tool that you're using, it can grow fast, right? These are larger schools. It looks like John is on, so we can bring him in. Hey, John, how are you?
It's good to see you're so adaptable.
Maybe he's working through his mic stuff.
Am-
So in the meantime, I'll keep going.
Oh,
There he is.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Yep,
Yeah.
there we
So
go.
we were just talking about your homepage
Woo.
and how I think you have also made a strategic design decision to, the login is immediately going to WordPress multi-site. Is that correct? Where folks are kind of defaulting there, and then it has to be, an intentional choice to move to domain of one's own. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the login currently goes to sort of a choice between the two, but we're positioning the multi-site as the default. And so on that page, it sort of encourages you to go to multi-site. And I think, eventually we will just sort of push people directly to the multi-site. We worked a lot on this language. We sort of spent, an inordinate amount of time just trying to figure out the language here to make it clear as to where people are supposed to go. And we do still have a few issues with that. Occasionally people will log into the multi-site and then say, where are my sites? And they don't realize that they're, they were domain of one's own and they're still in the domain of one's own. And they're just, now on a different system. But so there's been a little bit of confusion, but it's gone fairly well. And what we're finding is that, the vast majority of our undergrad users are blogging for a single course. And so when they're blogging for one course, multi-site is great and it fulfills their needs. And then if they're in a class that's like, digital humanities class or an LIS class, then the domains make a lot more sense. And faculty are sort of split half and half as to what they want. And so, just trying to give everybody the best user experience we can.
That's great.
I also like your thinking, John, and you and Adam have both talked about this, about recognizing a pattern. I think Tom Woodward could speak to this again, and many other people in domains. Like, you're seeing a lot of people just using WordPress, so you do want to kind of reconsolidate those resources, and WordPress multi-site represented a real kind of a consolidation of some of that to make managing the whole project easier. Does that make sense? I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I'll talk a little bit more this afternoon about what we found when we were doing some analysis on our domain of one's own. But basically we were finding that a lot of people are just wanting one WordPress site and they're using it for 3 months, and it exactly lines up with a semester. And so for those people, the multi-site is great, and it's just much easier to stand up and get started. But we do have people using Omeka S and Omeka and Drupal and Joomla and everything else, and custom HTML. And so we do want to continue to support that. The challenge right now for me is documentation. And so this is still, primarily focused on our DOO side of things. And then I've got a separate set of documentation for the multi-site. But again, just making sure that users find what they need and find the documents that they need is figuring all of that out on the fly.
And I was going to say, Reclaim Hosting thinks about this a lot internally as well with our own documentation. Is how do you provide enough of an overview of cPanel and enough of the applications that are quite popular, but then also provide support for all of the Installatron applications, like that balance there of, these are the applications that are most popular, most used. So we're going to try and provide some more robust documentation around them, knowing that we're probably not going to get, everything covered, in which case going to the application support directly is probably best.
Yeah, and WordPress multi-site, and you can chime in here, obviously, John, because you have more direct experience with it right now than I do, but it represents its almost own world of WordPress. there's WordPress and then there's WordPress multi-site, and there's a whole series of themes,
Yeah.
plugins, different ways that people hack it. And it's interesting that WordPress multi-site has had a very big uptake in higher ed. And I think there is, you know, some direct link between Reclaim Hosting's history and that history, which is cool. But I think the other thing worth thing is, like, we as a community have to start documenting and building kind of training for folks to manage that. And one of our oversights as a company is, you know, we host WordPress multi-site, but we haven't built out the culture and the understanding of the tools and how to work for it. And I think that's part of Reclaim Ed Tech in my mind, is bringing in folks like Tom Woodward, who've run very big WordPress multi-sites, to kind of get people who are interested in doing this or who have doing it but don't have a community to deal with, to kind of have some of that access. So WordPress multi-site is increasingly becoming a large part of the kind of broader Reclaim hosting ecosystem. So we're trying to get to that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, even just having, you know, pointers from y'all to Tom's blog where he explains a lot of his work, and to some of the other resources that exist is really useful. And then, yeah, as you said, you know, just figuring out which plugins we wanted to start off with was a bit of a challenge. And really, we just looked at what they were doing with the last site that you were just showing in England. Anyway,
Coventry domain.
Coventry, yeah, sorry. Coventry, they've done a really good job, and the plugins that they were using. And so I sort of reverse engineered a couple of their like screenshots even, and just tried to figure out what plugin they use to make those screens happen. And so yeah, I need to post about that, and then maybe share the post with y'all just so that you can replicate it wherever you want to.
No, and
what we're using.
think building a kind of working group around WordPress multi-site and some of those recommendations and being intentional on our part is something we want to do, because, you know, we know this is a domain of one's own workshop, but part of that, you know, what sits kind of adjacent to domain of one's own is also understanding how your folks are using it. And if enough of them are using WordPress by default, that's probably a good investment for your community more broadly.
Yeah, and I like the way that Lauren's phrased it a couple times of just thinking at different maybe scales or user intentions, is that
Tiers almost.
Yeah,
you know?
tiers. Yeah. So, you know, the multi-site as being an entry point, the domains as being, you know, the main midpoint, and then and then cloud being for sort of the extreme users.
Well, John, it's been great. Thank you so much for hopping in on the fly. I know we kind of put you on the spot there, but it's been awesome to chat with you. And I know we'll be seeing you later today as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Coming up next, I think we want to highlight just some other domain of one's own schools that are doing pretty cool design work, not necessarily focusing on combining services. You know, those were the last two examples, but now just sort of looking at different branding. Some of these schools that we'll be highlighting, starting first with Home Base, where we are in St. Norbert, you know, have mascots and things. So I am
dioramas of our.
So I am going to share my screen. This is Night Domains. I'll put the domain in the banner here, and I will give Taylor
do we
an
have
opportunity.
anyone who can talk to Night Domains?
You know, I wonder. Taylor.
So the funny thing about this is, so I was, you know, domains admin at SNC when this redesign went through, but I have very little to do with this redesign in terms of the actual work. This was pretty much all done by students, and actually really mostly one student, Easton Wember, who was a domains research assistant for us and did a few different projects, but this was one of them. I'll have to dig it up, but there's actually a talk that Easton gave on her design process with this that would be really good. But I can definitely speak to some of the like higher level decisions in terms of basically the main thing is we felt it was really important to do something with the homepage that really met exactly what the need, like what the immediate needs are when you visit the page. So I'm kind of really big into trying to figure out like, okay, who is visiting this web page and what do they need when they get here? And so for us, we realized that anyone visiting Night Domains already has probably heard about Night Domains. They didn't accidentally type this into a URL, into an address bar, right? They came here for some reason. And so, we've talked a lot about like at SNC a lot about like the elevator pitch for domains, but we figured most people who are here have actually already heard that elevator pitch and need either a refresher or some technical information, and they just need to know where to go. So like right away at the front of the page, we've got, you know, the sign up button, obviously, but as you scroll down, we kind of, this 4-step process was something that was kind of, I don't know, it looks simple, but we spent a lot of time thinking about what this should say and in what order. So we really want to make it clear, like, look, anybody can sign up and we have support documentation. And when you need help, the tech bar, which is the students that are trained on domains and a few other things, can help you with an appointment.
And to that point, you know, you mentioned it looks simple, but I think anytime you have something that comes across as very simple,
It's hard. Yeah.
There's strategy behind making it simple, right? You have to make your language super concise. You have to know exactly what you're trying to say. And it's a good practice internally to say, why are we sharing this? What are we trying to convey? And what is the most simplistic way possible to say that? And I think for Reclaim, this is something that we think about often with how we're talking about the technologies, and also, you know, for domains admins, how we're delivering this. You know, how are we translating technical concepts in a way for a beginner user to understand? And so again, it looks very simple, but I really appreciate this idea because it's anyone could follow 4 steps, right? It's only 4 steps.
It's only 4 steps.
Yeah, and then the last step of the 4 steps is sharing and creation, which if you click the share button real quick, and we can go back in a little bit, but this will take you out to the community page for Night Domains, which is very similar to the community template that I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But basically, this is a place for SNC folks to submit sites they're working on, and then they can get showcased here.
This is fantastic.
So that was kind of the idea, is that, hey, one of the steps is we want to know what you're doing. You know, we want you to share that. So that we wanted to make that prominent. If you go back to the Night Domains page here, it's also linked in the menu at the top too, under community examples.
And I will say, just kind of while you were talking, Taylor, I was sort of going through into the FAQ, and I love these questions, you know, because it's more than just, how do I reset my password? You know, it's
almost none of that.
Right. It's is it really my domain if you grade it, right? Like, what a cool, I mean,
to be fair, that would be an Autumn Canes thing. So that has persisted as long as when Autumn worked here. That was and that had an energy that we definitely couldn't remove from the site.
I think
Totally.
there was a student by the name of Andrew, and I'm forgetting his last name, unfortunately, who was at Davidson College and wrote, "Is it my domain if you grade it?"
Mm-hmm.
And there was a whole article about it. And I was like, yeah, radical students. Like what a point. Like I was ready for the 60s hippies to come out with no
Right.
shoes and signs. I was like, yeah, reclaim it.
No, yeah. And also what does Virginia Woolf have to do with this? Like,
Yes.
that's brilliant, you know? That's just so good. But yeah, I loved this answer because you immediately get into ownership, and suddenly you're thinking about what it means to be a digital citizen and what happens when you put your stuff online. Is it really yours anymore?
Exactly.
And so I think, I love that this is just right here on the homepage.
And that philosophy and that kind of approach to what this is and how it kind of is going to resonate with your community, because not every community that will resonate with, but like understanding that and framing it to work through that is really important, right? We can talk about the nuts and bolts of WHM and WHMCS and WordPress, and we need to, because that's how you're going to manage this. But a whole nother layer to domains is understanding what it is to your community, how you'll use it, and how to accomplish that as seamlessly and iconographically, really like just 4 simple steps. Or Coventry, you'll notice with their Learn, there's a lot of iconography that takes you through it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So basically that frequently asked questions part was important. And we were really kind of adamant in the design process that this is probably all that belonged on the homepage. So if you go to the about page, that's the elevator pitch style stuff. And that's actually what is on, this is pretty similar to what comes on the theme out of the box. I mean, it's tweaked a little bit, but it's a similar type of, you can even see like the icons are kind of laid out similarly. We changed the subject a little bit, but this used to be our homepage for Night Domains, essentially, with the sign up button, but we moved it to about as a secondary thing because, again, we figured most people opening their browser, typing in night.domains, either want to log in because they already have an account, or they're about to make one because they were either told or heard about it and they want to know more. It's not actually their first time in our situation. Obviously that's going to be different in everybody. We do, when I was at St. Norbert, I did a lot of like going into classrooms and talking about this stuff. So that's often their first times hearing about it. But in case that's not the case, we do have this about page, and that would frequently get linked to for folks as well.
Well, that's really cool. Thank you, Taylor, so much for talking about this. This is, easily one of my favorite sites to link back to, just because I also appreciate the branding and the kind of mascot for Night Domains.
One other thing I should mention too is that the mascot is Norby. That is the like college mascot at St. Norbert. But the icon with the web behind Norby is the Night Domains. Was specifically made for that. And this one I think is a good example of this is Elementor on the home and about pages, and it's actually still the default theme. It looks very different than the default theme, but it's just using the built-in theme. We didn't change the theme at all. The last thing I'm proud of on this is the login button. That login button changes to dashboard when you're logged in. That took a stupid amount of time for me to figure out. And if I knew more about WordPress, it probably would have been easier. But if you're logged in, it says dashboard. And if you're logged out, it says login.
That's awesome.
But that was no plugin needed for that. That's actually just a thing you can do in WordPress with a little PHP snippet. So
cool. Well, I'm going to transition then to another site. We've got a couple more examples here. And I know we're coming close on time. Jim, were you pointing to me?
I was pointing you across the table. Can I swap streams for a second? I just want to point out, I just realized the Indie Web has a domain of one's own web page, wiki page, but to the point of Norby with that web, if you look at the domain of one's own original art, which was what we used at UMW, that web is very similar to the web that Norby has. And that's inspired by a 1960s, 70s Spider-Man aesthetic. So I really love that. Anyway, that has little to do. But the other thing with building out your domains that I don't think I can stress enough is your aesthetic matters. How you imagine and envision this space matters. I really love an aesthetic that kind of captures and plays with is playful with the idea of the web. I love that.
And if you don't believe Jim, just go check out the art on our website, or maybe Taylor at some point will pan back to the awesome live bookshelf that we have that the St. Norbert folks put together.
It matters.
I'll pop the EdTech logo in the top corner.
Exactly. To kind of wrap up here the last couple of minutes, a few more examples that I wanted to share. The folks at University of Colorado Boulder have an amazing site, buffscreate.net. I love that they kind of have this running text below of things that you can use domain of one's own for, taking control of your data, building out a digital identity, constructing digital class projects, just really kind of cool what you can do with Buffs Create. So this is kind of familiar. Those three things, or those three sections you'll see in the main, starter.
It's the Enfold theme that we give to every school.
Right. And
the base.
And I can't remember if they've just built off of the Enfold theme, or if this is a separate theme. Maybe I'll look at that after this and can leave those details in Discord. But I think it's just really cool that you start off with framing how this can be helpful, what you can do with it, right? And making it your own, linking out to frequently asked questions. And then you're not sure where to start. That's cool too. Let's slow down. and then again, highlighting the community work. So just bringing in those elements wherever you can is really cool. I love that.
The community showcase is important. And I know there has been a community workshop that we've done, community chat, where Taylor, you've worked with various schools to get the community site up and running for them. And we have one that runs on Gravity Forms. And if a community site is something you're interested in integrating into your domain of one's own and it's not there already, that is something we would love to hear about and help you with. So definitely reach out. We've had folks after that community chat do that. And we also want to extend that to you all now. That will be using a tool that actually you'll hear about in a little bit called Gravity Forms. And we're going to have a month-long flex course on in June, where Tom Woodward, over the course of 4 weeks, will be taking us from kind of very simple uses of Gravity Forms to more expert uses. And hopefully the idea is you follow along, take that both an hour synchronously, but asynchronously learning how to do stuff. And over the course of 4 weeks, you'll have a really good idea of what Gravity Forms is all about and how you can use it as an ed tech and beyond. So stay tuned for that.
And also, just before jumping out to my final example, Buffs Create support page is actually really cool. I haven't seen this one yet. I just sort of stumbled on it, and I love getting started, understanding cPanel domain management. It's like the three pillars for getting started. They're highlighting the popular applications for their community, and then right to, when you leave, here's what to consider, and explore all the other guides below. So I love how that's just, again, delivered and framed out based on what you're going to need.
Beautiful. Yeah, I agree. I hadn't seen that before either.
I know. All right. Last couple of minutes, the last one I wanted to share, and we pointed to this one briefly yesterday, domains.unf.edu. This is from the University of North Florida. This is built using Elementor. And again, a similar theme here of just show the world your blog, your book, your website. So I think that's really cool, just to start your portfolio, just to help you, again, get the gears turning.
Am I safe to assume that this was designed by our old friend, Andy Rush?
I believe so, Mr. Rush.
I am feeling the rush right now.
So again, signing up, building, and publishing, just stepping stones. I see some of these patterns throughout, and I love that. And joining the community about faculty domains, and just thinking of it more as a playground for exploring. And when I think about it that way, you take the scariness away from it. I can't touch anything because I don't want to break it. It's like, go in and try and break it, and then let's learn how to fix it.
You'll notice every example we've shown now pretty much has a showcase.
Yeah.
Like there now, it's always been the case. Examples win. When you're on the ground talking to faculty, talking to staff, students, we can talk to her blue in the face about the powers of cPanel, but once they see what someone can do with this, with a specific example, as you all have seen today, Tom, Ed, so many examples shared, they really do take us to the next level of making us or pushing us to actually jump in there and try it.
Yeah.
So examples always win.
Absolutely. So as we're kind of coming to a close here, if you have any questions about things that we have talked about today, these examples, if you have questions for the admins that created them, and we can sort of filter those questions to them, or other examples that we didn't get to, please let us know. That would be really helpful to know in the chat, and we will use that as we continue conversations today. Any closing thoughts?
Well, no, I'd say that's right. Get ready your questions, because the next session we're going to jump to is a Q&A, which is kind of
That's right.
us digging deeper a little bit on what we showed, what's possible. So that's a really good place for you to not only ask, hey, here's a good example I had, or what did you do in this example? How did they build this? But also anything else today that you want to know more about. Let's take the time, slow down a bit, and see how we can help.
Awesome. And if anything, we could look at Jet Backup a little bit, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yep.
So cool. All right.
The world is your oyster.
Exactly. Well, in that case, thank you all so much for joining today's session on building out domains. I'm super excited to continue on our conversations for the rest of the day, and we will see you there. There you go.